on the 20th of January 1939, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe developed a sense of interest in studying the unknown that exists outside of this world. His intuition and unflagging interest for astrobiology and astrophysics at a young age catapulted him to greater heights. Challenging the findings of a couple of Dutch astronomers that the interstellar dust is made of tiny microscopic crystals, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe theorized that the dust is perhaps a form of carbon, indicating that it consists of organic material. His conclusions of the carbon theory was so exemplary that he went on to obtain a fellowship from the University of Cambridge. Professor Chandra's work was greatly recognized in Sri Lanka as he discovered that the red rain which showered over Polonnaruwa consists of a certain form of algae, indicating life outside of the world. He shares his groundbreaking work in the fields of astrophysics and astrobiology with us on this special edition.
A very good evening to all our viewers tuning in. This is a special interview with Vidya Jyoti Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, one of the greatest astronomers the country has ever produced. Thank you very much for joining us,
Thank
Professor.
you.
And I think it's quite fitting to have this interview with Dr. Arthur C. Clarke in the view, and I'm sure it will rekindle some of the memories that you've had with Sir Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah, well, I first met him on an airplane, and it was in 1963. I was a PhD student in Cambridge at the time, and I was going back to visit my parents in Sri Lanka for the holidays. So I was seated on this aircraft. It was one of these old, I don't know, Comet something, not a Boeing 747 even, right? So I was feeling, and it was very sort of bumpy ride, and I was feeling very queasy and sick, and so the guy seated next to me said, you must be from Sri Lanka. I said, yes. And so we got into conversation, and so that was really the beginning of my relationship with Arthur. And Arthur, over the rest of his life, essentially, kept in very close contact and touch with me, because on that airplane ride we discussed almost everything about astronomy and about his own interests. And I was at the time, in 1963, engaged in a project that was a criticism of everything that was in astronomy at the time in terms of the chemistry of space. And although he was not a scientist, trained as a scientist, he had a very sharp mind, and a sort of judgment was fantastic as to what was right and what was not right in science. So he encouraged me all along from the 1960s, and we kept in touch. He wrote forewords and so on to several books that I wrote, published in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. So that was my connection with Arthur C. Clarke.
Well, Professor, you lived through the colonial era, at least at the latter part of it. You studied at that time. You studied astronomy at that time, is it right? How much of a challenge was it to kind of challenge the norm at the time? And how much has Sri Lanka moved forward in comparison to how it was in the field of astronomy then and now?
Well, I think there was very little interest in astronomy when I was growing up, and very little sort of technical interest. The universities had no courses, nobody was really interested in astronomy, with the exception of one person, a guy called Douglas Amarasekara, who was really, he's a remarkable man, and he had a great influence on my early life when I was studying at the university in Colombo in the mathematics department. He was first a senior lecturer and then a professor in the maths department. So he took me and a few other students under his wing, and we talked a lot about astronomy. He was a Cambridge scholar. He had studied mathematics and he had read very widely. And it was his influence also that made me really passionately interested in Greek culture and Greek civilization. He introduced me to, for instance, the classic works of Plato. So by the age of 19 or something, I had read all of the dialogues of Plato, the plays of Sophocles, and so on. So, and this was thanks to Douglas Somerset. Then I also was influenced by another eminent mathematician who was also a professor at the time in Colombo, and that was a man called Eliezer, C.J. Eliezer. It's worth dwelling a little bit on Eliezer because it was through my connection with him that I made contact and started collaborating eventually with Fred Hoyle, the iconic astronomer of the 20th century. At the end of my degree course in Colombo, I had secured a first-class honors degree in mathematics, and I was essentially at the top of the batch of the year. And it was also this 1962 was the first year in which the British government gave scholarships to promising students in the Commonwealth, and it was called the Commonwealth Scholarship Scheme, and I was one of the first recipients of a Commonwealth scholarship. So that was the beginning of my research career. But if you want me to go back earlier in my childhood, I was interested in astronomy in a general sort of way from a much earlier age. From the age of about 12 or 13, I remember going out in our back garden, which was in Colombo Folk, Bambalapiti at the time, and there was no traffic, heavy traffic or anything. It was looked like a village by modern standards, right? The skies were pristine, there was no pollution, there was no tuk-tuks or anything, so the air was mostly clean, and on many, many nights you could really see the beautiful spectacle of the Milky Way, right? Arching across the night sky. And so I would often stare at this great sight of the stars and the galaxy and so on, and wonder about what it all means.
So your interest for astronomy started at a very early age?
At a very early age. I would say about 13 or 14, I built my own telescope, and I was looking at Venus and Saturn and so on through this little refracting telescope. And I would often just go out and stare at the night sky and wonder what it was all about. So I was determined from a very early age to study astronomy later on, and to find out how these stars shine in the night. Why do stars shine was a question that I set myself to answer, and so eventually I ended up being a research astronomer sort of 10 years later.
Professor, you seem to have had a very good backing, at least by a lot of experts that you just recollected. But do you think students in Sri Lanka who aspire to do astronomy have the same sort of backing, at least in education system too?
Today?
Yes.
Well, I would like to think so. I think the facilities do exist, and there are astronomical societies that are amateur astronomical societies that are really quite enthusiastic in looking at the stars and encouraging young people to get interested in astronomy. I believe there was a planetarium that was being built at the time that I left. I'm not sure whether it is functional anymore, but I think there are plenty of opportunities. And nowadays, the internet is a great source of inspiration and knowledge, and for people who want to be delving into astronomy.
Well, you seem to have a lot of challenging notions about climate change, and you also seem to have very interesting ideas about what's really happening in the world and the topics that are always being trending day in and day out. Especially when we had a conversation with you before the interview, we realized it. We should touch on it while during the conversation with you. But are you excited about going back to your school, going back to your university and reliving some of the moments with us on News First?
Yes, I would love to. I think my school and the university, which was only a University of Ceylon, one campus at the time in Colombo, they were the institutions that made me. Essentially, I owe my entire career to both my school and the university from which I had my first degree. So I would love to go back and sort of recollect my past, as it were. I think it is the country and the family background and the cultural background that makes a person, that makes a person what he or she is. And my parentage also was really relevant, because my father was a really brilliant mathematician in his own right. He went to Cambridge in 1932, I think it was, and he went to Trinity College, Cambridge, the College of Newton, and so on, and Bertrand Russell, and he had the highest honors in that college as a student. So he was interested. My father was really also passionately interested in astronomy, although he didn't take it up as a career. In the days in the 1930s, it was in the heyday of the British Empire, and there were no opportunities for sort of academic jobs back in Ceylon, as it was then. So he ended up, after his first-class honors degree, he was a star wrangler, as they call it, sort of first-class honors in maths in Cambridge is regarded as extremely high achievement.
Well, Professor, we are excited as you are to recollect some of the memories of you and rekindle some of the memories of you as a childhood back in Royal College, Colombo, and in University of Colombo, which was known as Ceylon University back in the day. So when we come back, we will see some of the footage of us talking to Professor at the University of Colombo, and we might even go to your classroom and have a look at it. Yes, we'll see whether things are the same even now. When we come back, stay tuned. This is a special interview with Vidya Jyoti Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe. Well, this is a special interview with Vidya Jyoti Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe. Well, we are in the premises of the University of Colombo, which was known as Ceylon University back in the day when Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe was studying in the 60s, if I am not mistaken.
57 to
in
60.
57, between 57 and 60. Well, this is where it all started, where your interest increased, was nurtured in astrobiology. How do you recollect this memory of being back in college?
I feel very nostalgic. This entrance brings back vivid memories to me. I remember setting out on a bicycle from our house in Hilden Place, Bumblebee, and riding up to here down Thurston Road and so on, and coming here and walking up these steps to attend a 9 o'clock lecture, maybe by Professor Eliezer.
Walking or running?
Walking. Going very fast on the bicycle.
Going very fast because you missed most of the lecture.
Yeah. So that was essentially the beginning of my technical training that made me fit for being an astronomer, being an astrobiologist. As I said, from a very early age, I was extremely interested in the stars, in understanding how stars shine at night and so on. And I had read lots of books, popular books such as Eddington and Jeans, and having read these books, I decided, maybe at the age of 15, 16, that to pursue my interest further, I had to have a very strong grounding in mathematics and in physics. And I thought that the time to acquire that knowledge was at university, so I set myself to to enter this university, which I did in 1957.
Well, you got 4 brothers, all of them, 3 brothers rather, all of them equally intelligent as you are, or you would even beg to differ.
Well, no, they were very, very high achievers. My youngest brother, Kumar, who was about 9 years younger than me, was not outstanding at school, and we thought he wasn't really academic, but he's ended up as the really quite a distinguished professor in nanotechnology, in nanophysics at the University of California in Irvine at the moment. So you're right. And we have this.
I think you all should give it a shot for a world record, because I think this is the first time in Asia you find 4 brothers who've ended up in the field of science and who were doing really well.
I think that's true. But I mean, I think the credit really was for the family, because goes to the family, because my father was a great inspiration for us. And as I told you, he was himself a very distinguished scholar. He won all the prizes at Royal College. His name is all on the boards, 1927, P.H. Wickramasinghe, and so on. So he was a living inspiration for all of us. And it was a hard act. We thought it was a hard act to follow, but in fact we overtook him in many ways.
I think, Professor Wickramasinghe, it will be a shame if you don't mention how you met your first love. It was here at this premises, in the university premises.
That's right. My wife Priya has been my lifelong companion from the age of sort of mid 1960s onwards, and I met her in Sri Lanka because I was for a brief period a professor at one of the universities in Sri Lanka. There were at that time the universities were multiplying in number, and there were several universities. So I was university. It was with Diodya Pirivena appointed me a professor, their first professor of mathematics. So I spent some time there, and of course I also kept visiting this very place to talk to my friends who were lecturers in the Department of Mathematics. And my wife was just around the corner here in the law school. The law department was there. So that's where I met her.
Very interesting. I think we should, without further ado, we should visit your classroom, and we'll see what we've got next. We'll visit Professor Wickramasinghe's classroom back in the day, in the 60s, in close to about 57 and 60.
That's right.
1960, and how things really changed around for you before you went to the UK in order to pursue your higher education. Stay tuned. So, Professor, when you found the meteoroid that fell in Polonnaruwa,
yes,
you came up with the conclusion, or the team, and you leading the team came up with the conclusion that there is life outside, or life began outside of planet Earth. How much of a skepticism did you sense?
Well, at the beginning of the theory that we propounded, not in connection with the meteorite particularly, but much earlier in the 1970s, 80s, skepticism was really quite ferocious, intense, because people were not used to thinking along those lines. For centuries, it was believed, certainly in the Western world, that life is something that is confined to the earth and contained on the earth and so on, and that life had to originate on the earth. All of the wonderful plants and animals and humans and so on we have here on the earth were thought to have arisen from single microbes spontaneously on the earth in what are called primordial oceans. So this is the concept that I challenged way back in the 1970s, mid-1970s. They were acclaimed at the beginning. The conclusions were published in very prestigious journals and so on. But gradually there was a feeling that this is the thin edge of the really difficult wedge that they had to cope with, and so there was antagonism that developed from that point.
And I'm sure you started challenging things from the time you were in the university, and it started right here in this classroom, where you started as a student, and when things changed around, and this is that classroom.
It's a very classroom, and I think it was important that in this classroom the lecturers and the professors taught me. This was a lecture room in which I learned for the first time the theory that is important in understanding the nature of cosmic dust. And so I could say that it is here that the whole story of life from space began.
And these four corners of these four walls of this room, that's where it all started.
Yeah, I remember, quite vividly remember sitting in these very chairs, not maybe the chairs were wooden at the time, in the sense that it was here that I learned the basics of the theory of electromagnetics. And that is the theory that was needed to understand what cosmic dust is made of.
Did you ever envision yourself being an astronomer, a world-renowned astronomer from Sri Lanka, when you were seated on one of these chairs?
Well, not the world-renowned part didn't occur to me at that time. I certainly had every ambition and aspiration to become an astronomer and to study astronomy from a very high point of view, from a very advanced point of view.
Well, right in the beginning of the program I mentioned that you had some of the challenging views even to do with climate change. You have a very opposing notion about it, as in very different to what people nowadays think, and you're not going to be in one of those groups where climate change is real. Do you think
Well, I think climate change is real. To begin with, I should tell you that I do not like to go with the flow, as it were, and to agree to everything that's been talked about around me. I like to think independently. I like to figure out things for myself, and I did. And this was the case right from a very early stage in my upbringing, from maybe from early teens. Well, climate change. I think there's no question that climate is changing. That the Earth's average temperature has risen by a couple of degrees over the last few decades. But the big question is how much of that rise is due to human activities. And I have, myself and my colleagues have challenged this point of view that it's human activities that is mainly responsible. I think human activities do contribute, but the major effect could be something that is out of our control.
So do you think the leader of the superpower in the world is going to change this altogether?
Well, I think the new leader of the superpower has promised to review the whole story of climate change. And I think that's a very welcome development, because when it comes to situations like the climate change, or positions that are taken up by people, by vast numbers of people in powerful places, there is a tendency to conform and to establish a conformist position, which is not always the correct one. So to think independently is very good, and I think Mr. New President of the United States has promised to do that. I mean, I don't know what the outcome is of human activities that produce a lot of carbon dioxide. I think in general that has to be controlled, because we don't want too much carbon dioxide. But on the other hand, if we don't have enough carbon dioxide, do you know what happens? We go back to an ice age.
Yes.
So we need carbon dioxide,
but at a very controlled
level.
So I think unfortunately we've come to the end of 10 minutes of the program, of the interview. Before we end the interview, I think it's good. It's going to be a perfect interview if you go and visit your school, Royal College Colombo, and I think you will have a lot to tell about that school and how exactly you nurtured your talent, your skills at a very early age. Thank you very much. Let's head into the final 10 minutes of this interview. Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, at the age of 12, how exactly was life at the age of 12 and 13?
Well, I was at school at this Royal College Colombo, and I enjoyed every bit of my schooling there. I learnt almost everything I learnt, really. I learnt at this school. I learnt English and classics, Latin, Greek, and mathematics and physics. And my really favorite subjects were mathematics and physics. And that essentially led me to astronomy, because as I said earlier, it was those subjects, maths and physics, that were really crucial for understanding astronomy at a deep level. So this was from about the age of 13, 14, and I was getting more and more interested in mathematics. I spent loads of time thinking about problems and so on. I was the best in the class in maths and physics and so on. But I also had a parallel passion, and that passion was for English literature. I was really immensely impressed by the literature of England. I loved the poetry, particularly the Romantics and so on. And so at the age of 15, I believe, when I had to choose between science and arts, I was really torn. I have a very great problem deciding which way to go. So I went to the headmaster of this school at the time. It was Mr. Dudley K.G. De Silva, and I told him what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to do both maths and English for my A-levels, with a view to taking a joint degree in physics, in maths and English at the university. Now, he was a very conservative kind of character, and he said, this is not possible, we don't have any facilities for doing this, and he essentially threw me out of his room. not literally, but he said, you're mad, you can't think of that, and you're so good at maths, you stick to the maths. So I was pretty angry, and I didn't know what to do. I thought I had to follow his advice, and which I did, and I took my A-levels in maths, and in fact I got the highest mark in the entire island.
Do you have any regrets of not having
studied? I do, in fact. I think at some moments in my life I think I should have gone the other way. Because
Sri Lanka would have been missing out on a lot if so.
Yeah, I suppose so, but I right from a very early age I thought that in mathematics and science and in the humanities you're really exploring the same universe. You're using different media, your different techniques, but it's the same world around us that we are exploring in different ways. So I made up for my choice in a sense by spending my spare time both reading and also writing poetry. And when I went to Cambridge, in fact, I was awarded a prize for poetry, for English poetry, when I was a student of mathematics and so on. So
quite rare, I suppose. Quite
I don't know. I mean, so my career in the school was somewhat blighted by the argument that I had with Mr. Dudley K.G. De Silva, the principal, and he said, leave my office. I can't make you a prefect if you argue with me. And he didn't make me a prefect.
Really? Oh wow. So which means this school reminds you of defiance. Of defiance.
And of learning.
Of learning too. And thank you very much for giving us insights, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us. And I'm sure all our viewers enjoyed this interview with you, up close and personal with you. You are one of the most influential and renowned astronomers to be produced in the country, and one of the Sri Lankans who have left a lot of inspiration to all our youngsters in the country to pursue a bigger career in astronomy, astrobiology. And I'm sure you are ready to work with Sri Lanka in order to establish a research center, in order to instill the knowledge that you've gained over the years among the youngsters in Sri Lanka. Do you have any plans?
Well, I would love to do that if I'm given the opportunity to do precisely that. And on several occasions I have tried to do similar things, but not succeeded 100%. And now there is an opportunity at the University of Ruhuna to set up a Sri Lanka Institute of Astrobiology, and I'm looking forward to contributing to that.
Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Wickramasinghe. It was a pleasure having you with us on News First. Well, that was Professor Wickramasinghe. He has been one of the trailblazers in astronomy, especially when it comes to national societies in astronomy. And I'm sure you enjoyed this interview with him. Stay tuned as we bring in a new guest next time with more insight and perspective. Thank you very much for joining. This is Stephanie Lazarus signing off for News First.